Smash hit from the Doctor Who special 1973.
Yay, baby, baby, yeah.
The music built up to a mind-busting climax, a whirlwind of amplified guitar and bass, pounding organ chords, a high-pitched wail from the lead singer's tormented vocal cords. And as it rose to a crescendo, the audience rose up with it. Up in their seats, onto their seats, dancing on their seats, dancing in the aisles, dancing alone and dancing with each other. The whole arena was a vast mixing bowl of noise and movement. And then it stopped. Suddenly. Wiped out by the turn of a switch.
Really, Brigadier, it was just beginning to interest me.
Doctor Who looked up in mock disappointment into the flushed face of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who stood with his hand still on the off switch of the television set. Of course, I'd hardly expect a military mind like yourself to be a music lover, but
music?
Lethbridge Stewart's voice was heavy with scorn.
Music. A lot of unwashed, long-haired layabouts caterwauling. My goodness, Doctor, I'd like to have that shower under my command for a week or two. Soon knock some of the nonsense out of them.
I can't help feeling you're a little behind the times, Brigadier. This, pop music is a very big thing to the youngsters. Surely when you were a teenager there must have been some popular songs that appealed to you? Set your feet tapping?
Granted, Doctor, there were, but we had real singers in those days. Vera Lynn, Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby,
and in an unsteady, decidedly off-key tenor, the Brigadier began to chant mournfully,
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas,
and then stopped as suddenly as the switched-off television set, seeing the poorly concealed look of pain on the Doctor's face.
Beg your pardon, Doctor. Got rather carried away, you know.
It was a little painful, Brigadier, but as a matter of fact you've made my point for me. Popular music, whether it's the crooners of your youth or the beat groups of today, takes a powerful hold on all sorts of people. That group we saw on the television screen, their music was reaching out to the audience. It was saying, listen, don't just sit there, you're young, you're alive, get up and show it, on your feet, move and dance. And the audience obeyed as we saw. When you think about it, Brigadier, it's rather frightening. The power of music, I mean. It's a scientific fact that certain combination of notes, certain harmonies can be acutely painful, can cause near madness. Just think of the use to which a skilled scientist could put that knowledge. It's probably just as well that no one has followed that line of research through to a conclusion. It had been a real bad night. Dragsville all the way. The ramshackle village hall at the back end of nowhere, and that only a quarter filled by a few bored kids who hadn't the money to look for their entertainment in the nearest town. And on top of that, the amplifiers had broken down again. The wiring needed a complete overhaul. But where was the money coming from? The money from tonight's session wouldn't even cover travelling expenses.
I reckon we might as well pack it in.
Nick Swift, lead guitarist and singer of the Swifts, thumped his fists on the dashboard of the ancient van that was the group's transport. As if in agreement, the wheezing engine coughed angrily, fired off a battery of backfire noises, and then stopped. Nick looked round at Speedy and Jock, huddled among the instrument cases in the body of the van.
I reckon this wraps it up. This is what the pop scene has got us, stuck on a country road in the back of beyond at midnight in the rain. When we get back to civilization, if we get back, we're going to flog the van and the instruments and look for jobs. But first, and grumbling in chorus, the three musicians piled out onto the roadside to hold a post-mortem on the rusty wreck of an engine under the bonnet of the van. The Rolls-Royce purred up so quietly beside them that the first they knew of its arrival was the silky voice that brought them out, oil-stained and hopeless, from under the bonnet.
"Can I be of any assistance, gentlemen?" Nick took in the huge, gleaming black car, and the face of its driver only half seen in the dim interior.
"Nice of you to stop, mate, but unless you're carrying a spare engine."
"So you are stranded by a mechanical failure." The voice from the dimly seen figure was mellow as old brandy, persuasive as a warm fire on a cold night. but I have plenty of room. I can go wherever you wish to go, and you can make arrangements to have your vehicle picked up later. But bring your instruments along. There's room for them too." It was not until the Rolls was sweeping silently through the night, with the Swifts comfortably settled in the deep leather seats and their guitars and drum kit neatly stowed in the boot, that Nick thought suddenly, now how in the name of goodness did he know we were musicians? There's no name on the van. Its doors were shut. He couldn't have seen the instruments, so how did he know? But even as he thought, his mind seemed to be clouding over. He was tired, sleepy. The Rolls swung into a gravelled driveway and pulled up in front of a large gaunt house which stood black against the sky. The driver got out, opened the front door of the house, and flicked switches that brought the house to light, if not to life. Then he turned back to the car. The three Swifts lay sprawled across the upholstery, unstirring. With a small sigh, the driver of the Rolls bent to the nearest body, pulled it towards him, heaved it over his shoulder, and set off for the house. The body was limp, a dead weight. Before he went back to bring the second unconscious musician from the Rolls, the master mopped his brow with a large silk handkerchief. Such a pity they couldn't walk in by themselves, but then they might not be prepared to cooperate, even in a scheme that was going to put them at number 1 on the last top 20 chart of all time. "And now, all you pop types, I'm going to give you something a little bit special. This ain't no ordinary disc I'm going to spin. This is... Behind the soundproof glass screen of the control room, the producer was gesturing to Billy the Kid Kidsley to snap it up. Kidsley swallowed. His mouth was dry. What had he been going to say? "Something's wrong with me," he thought. "I never dry up on the air. I'm the hit-a-minute kid. Out there 10 million teenagers are sitting around their transistors waiting for the word, only... What word? I don't know. I don't..." And even while Kidsley's thoughts jumbled around in his confused brain, his fingers were discarding the record he had been about to drop onto one of his bank of turntables. Beyond his control, they were digging into his briefcase, bringing out the unlabeled plastic disc the man with the beard and the deep, deep eyes had put into his hands that morning. The man who had stopped him on the way to the studio had looked at him, looked deep into his eyes. Eyes. Something in Kidsley's brain clicked into gear. The words he had been told to say came tumbling out as his fingers dropped the unlabeled disc onto the turntable, swung the pickup arm over. "Yes, friends, this one is special. A new group, one you've never heard of. But this music will speak to you. It will reach out and take hold of you. It'll tell you what to do. Remember, it will tell you what to do." And as the diamond stylus grooved into the track, the audience of Britain's most popular disc jockey heard for the first and only time the group that had once been the Swifts. But now they had one new member and a new name. They were the Four Horsemen. They came from Land's End and from John O'Groats. They came from Bristol and from Hull, from Liverpool and Dover, from the big cities, from the smallest villages. They had several things in common. They were almost all young, some very young, some in their late teens. They all carried in their hands or slung from their shoulders transistor radios. The radios were all switched on. The radios were all playing the same tune. It had no title, it had no words, but from close on 10 million transistor sets, it flooded the country. It was the biggest smash hit of all time. It was the sound of the Four Horsemen. What does a country do when about 10 million of its citizens decide to converge on a single spot? What can a police force of a few thousand do against 10 million? What can an army do? Shoot them down? But they've committed no crime. They have in some cases taken over trains, buses, even aircraft. But they have done it without bloodshed, by sheer weight of numbers. When 10 million people decide to do the same thing at the same time, to go to the same place all together all at once, then there is nothing short of nuclear weapons that can stop them. So what does a country do? What does Britain do? When 10 million teenagers with 10 million radios playing the same tune over and over again decide to march, ride or fly to Stonehenge? Answer: it does nothing. There is nothing it can do. It was Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart who gave the order that shut down every power station in England. After it had become obvious that everyone in Britain's major broadcasting studio had gone mad, from the disc jockey who kept playing the same record, to the studio staff who had turned the building into a fortress to prevent anyone stopping him, the only thing to do was to shut off the power. To that studio, and to any other where the madness might break out again. The Brigadier gave the order, but the doctor suggested it. "It hasn't worked, Doctor. They're still on the move," Lethbridge Stewart had to shout to make himself heard above the roar of the helicopter's engine. He glanced over from the controls to where the doctor sat, gazing down on the scene below. And what a scene! Salisbury Plain is one of Britain's biggest open spaces. From the air, it's a huge, desolate expanse of grass, scrub and heathland, cut by the narrow ribbons of high road that run across it. But now, seen from above, it was a monster kaleidoscope of shifting colours, a swirling mass with at its centre the grey ring of stones that has brooded on the plain since the dawn of history. Stonehenge. "I'd say there are at least 3 million people down there." The doctor's voice was pitched just high enough to carry across the clatter of the helicopter's rotors. "By shutting off all power, stopping broadcasting, we may have prevented more coming. They must be spreading along every road in the country, dazed, waiting to be told what to do next. But these are the ones we must worry about imminently. Tell me, Brigadier, if you knew that those 3 million down there were going to be ordered to destroy this country and everything in it, what would you do?" Lethbridge Stewart sent the helicopter swooping low over the serried ranks below. Not a single head was raised up to glance at it. "Doctor, they're just ordinary youngsters, and the only way to stop them would be an atomic bomb. No man in the world could give that order." "In that case, Brigadier, you must be ready to follow my orders implicitly. I believe I know what has caused this madness. I hope that I can stop it. If I cannot, that order to destroy will be given, and it must be obeyed. Now I must land at Stonehenge." In the middle of them? 2 of us? 3 million zombies closing in? You're as mad as they are, Doctor. What can you hope to do? Either do as I say, Brigadier, or prepare for the destruction of Britain, or the nuclear annihilation of 3 million innocent youngsters. Now, will you land? The helicopter hovered briefly a few feet above the silent, steadily moving, unseeing, unhearing throng beneath. Then it swung away, heading for the grey circle of stones on the horizon. 2 miles above the earth, the commander of a Delta-winged Valiant bomber glanced at his watch. Closed up at either wingtip of his plane were 2 more Valiants. Each one carried a tactical nuclear bomb, enough to wipe out all life over an area as wide as, say, Salisbury Plain. The pilot thought, "According to the last orders before radio contact stopped, I am to lead the flight in a pattern over this area for 30 minutes. We are then to dive to bombing level above Salisbury Plain. If 3 red signal rockets are not fired from Stonehenge immediately, we are to make a bombing run. These orders come directly from the Prime Minister and the Chiefs of Staff. They must be obeyed. But after those bombs go down, how can any of us bear to go on living? And there are only 10 minutes left." The master had expected the power to be cut off. But as he had planned, as he had guessed, it had been done too late. As he looked from his vantage point, standing atop the great granite altar stone of Stonehenge, he could see the millions spread out across the plain. These were near enough to pick up the vibrations. These would obey. And these were enough. The vibrations. Vibes. That magical aura that a good group can put out, almost as something separate from its music. Good vibes can make you happy, make you dance. What can bad vibes do? They can turn you into a marching, mindless moron. They can tell you to destroy. In the master's mind lay centuries of evil knowledge, and every atom of that knowledge, that evil, had been packed into the music that now pounded out from the strangest musicians of all times. the personnel of the Four Horsemen. Lead guitar, someone who had once been called Nick Swift, but his mind was now the Master's. Second guitar, that had once been Speedy. The robot that hammered the drums had once been Jock. The fourth musician, now jumping from the altar stone, swooping like a black crow across the turf to make a delicate adjustment to the massive electronic synthesizer he had designed so carefully, was the Master. The name? The Four Horsemen, the Master's own grim joke. The four dreadful horsemen of legend, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, plague, famine, war, and death. The immense volume of sound pouring from the synthesizer drowned out even the roar of the helicopter's engine. The Master turned from his controls just in time to see it settle in the centre of the ring of stones, only a dozen yards away. He saw the hatch open, saw the trimly uniformed figure of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart jump out, and then stepping down onto the turf in the heart of the ancient temple, the Master's arch-enemy, Doctor Who. But the Master only smiled. He turned again to the synthesizer, the electronic marvel that turned simple notes and chords into an insistent, undeniable command. A command that no normal human being could deny. The Master made another small adjustment. As Lethbridge Stewart whirled and leapt towards him, the Doctor knew that he was only seconds away from death at the hands of the man who had been his only ally. The Brigadier's eyes were bulging, the veins on either side of his throat stood out. There was bloodlust in his eyes. The Doctor caught the outstretched, clawing hands only a split second before they closed on his throat. As the two men crashed to the ground, locked in a life-or-death struggle, the Master smiled. And all around the ancient stone circle, spreading for miles across the plain, his 3 million puppets pressed inwards. It was time to give them their final orders. It was time for the Four Horsemen to play their last and most deadly tune. Plucked on the guitars, hammered by the drums, shaped by the synthesizer, the message went out. The time is here. You will obey. Destroy. 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 2 miles above Earth, a flight of delta-winged bombers began their swift descent. On the short turf between the standing stones, a man swung his arm in a short, chopping blow. His opponent took the blow on the neck, jerked, then lay still. The winner staggered to his feet. The Master turned from his masterpiece of electronic evil to find the battered, swaying figure of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart looming over him. Doctor Who, powerless to prevent what was to happen, lay unconscious at the foot of the altar stone. The marching millions still pressed inwards. The final message was beginning to take hold. In a few more moments they would be dispersing to begin the destruction, which would leave the Master all-powerful in a shattered country. Or in response to their final orders, the bombers would have wiped out Master, Doctor, Brigadier, and 3 million innocent people whose only crime was to have switched on a pop program. Doctor Who's body was not that of a normal man, otherwise he could never have recovered so swiftly from the Brigadier's murderous blow. For one moment his eyes registered the scene that returning consciousness revealed. Then he was up and running for the helicopter. As the 3 red rockets burst in a flower of flame below, the pilot of the bomber let out with a rush the breath he had been unconsciously holding as his fingers reached for the bomb release button. Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart came out of a red mist, a dream of horror, to find himself standing amid a tangle of wires, valves, shattered circuitry, and metal plates. A few yards away, 2 young men clutching guitars sprawled on the turf. They were just beginning to stir. A third lad, collapsed over a drum kit, opened dazed eyes to stare at him. And then, as far as the eye could see, a huge army of youngsters looked around and at each other with a single question. What in the name of wonder are we doing here? You destroyed it! The Doctor grabbed at the Brigadier's arm, half supporting the bewildered man. The Master gave you the full vibrations, and you tried to kill me. In fact, you very nearly did. But when you thought you had finished me, you looked for the next thing to destroy, and that was the master and his machine. A general order to destroy is such a clumsy thing. It recoiled on the man who gave it. You tore his marvellous machine apart with your bare hands. A pity you did such a good job. I'd have liked to have examined it. I wonder what power source he used. And the master himself? The Brigadier's usually firm, crisp voice was hoarse and strained. Did I destroy him? I fear not. I imagine that as soon as he realised his mistake, as soon as you attacked, he made himself scarce. Not difficult for him to lose himself in a crowd of 3 million, especially since all of them must feel as if they've awoken from a nightmare. You'd better get the helicopter aloft. We'll need to rig up a public address system, organise transport. Excuse me, mister. The plaintive voice was that of a very puzzled, shaken Nick Swift. But if you know what's been going on, I'd wish you'd tell me and my mates. The last thing we remember, we were stranded on this country road and we'd just decided to give up the pop scene. Give it up, my dear boy, yes. Yes, perhaps you should. Although, as the doctor said to the Brigadier days later, when the last of the master's one-time puppets had found their baffled way home, it seems a bit hard on the Swifts. Never to know that they played what could have been the greatest smash hit of all time.